You know, there is a saying, a very old saying, when the pupil is ready, the master will appear. It will take dedication, it will take time.
Why are you so eager to help me?
Because once, a long time ago, you did the same for me.
So this story starts back in 2007 when we had the opportunity to solicit working with the Chinese and the Chinese national team in during the Beijing Olympics. So I have affectionately titled it, Skio China, the Greatest Story Never Told. And it's funny, I've got nerves going on in this one. Never had nerves going on when I'm up here, but I've got nerves going on today. Isn't that nutty? Okay, so Skio China, the greatest story never told. Itinerary. We're going to discuss Skio China in the Beijing 2008 Olympics is where it begins. We're going to discuss running a 2-year, $6 million per year corporate contract with the China Development Bank, which is the 3rd largest bank in China. We're going to discuss Skio and the SFDA, the findings and our experience in working with the FDA, which has become probably the most stringent licensing board in the world at this point. And we're going to discuss Skio China and the public and private hospital system. So strap your seatbelts in and get ready, because here we go. Everything that you're going to see in this presentation would not have been possible but for the work of the people in this list. And I'm very, very grateful that I got to surf this wave, per se, and be on this journey, this ride. But without these people, that would have never been possible. So I would very much like to thank Bill Nelson and QX International, including Andrea, including Edit, including Richard, many sleepless nights supporting us getting the documents we needed, both for the SFDA, supporting us in creative ideas for working with national level athletes, just for everything that they do, for development of the Skio, for funding, for being a part of funding the Beijing Olympics 2008. So, before we even get started, just a big round of applause for Bill Nelson. Thank you. Also, thanks goes to Brian Thompson, TQA, Roger Lessard, the Quantum Knights, Xiaolong Ke, the head of Greenlong Health China, Li Guoping, the Minister of Sport Medicine China, Jeff Sutton, Li Ping Jiao, Yinlin, Tara Geerdink, Kente, Rodney Bali, Laura Franklin Leatherman, my wife and son. And thank you to all of you, because without every single one of us actively creating in the ether on a daily basis, there again, none of this would have been possible. It is but each one of us creating a quantum magnet which has enabled us to step forward in this industry and bring this important technology to the world. And ultimately, at this point, especially after everything that I've done in China, is that I've seen that there is a place for this device in mainstream integration. And as we continue to go through the lecture this afternoon, what we're going to find is that the device is absolutely capable of duplicating results, as well as results in testing, as well as cause and effect in working with therapy. So just a big thank you goes out to every single one of you, because honestly, without all of us together, this wouldn't have happened, nor would the future be as potentialful and bright. So big thank you, and a big round of applause before we get into this one. So here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3, yes! Okay, and of course I have to give special thanks thanks to the mastermind of the whole thing, Victor meant the right, and if we're working from your perspective, I still think he's on the right. The one not in the sport coat. His name is Xiao Victor Ke. In, I guess it would have been October of 2007, Victor took a trip out to China to expose the skio to some people within government and see what happened. Within 3 days, he was led through the president of China's brother, because he is very, very well connected. Oh my God. In 3 days of being in China and putting up feelers in regards to the device, the Chinese were very progressive, very interested in working with the device and the technology, or at least learning about it. And he was put to the Minister of Sport Medicine China, the gentleman that you see in the blazer. Funny enough, in that blazer, it was right before he was about to go for the walk for the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, which was really cool. Anyways, Victor was put in touch with Li Guoping. Li Guoping watched a promotional DVD about the skio. And at 6 a.m. the following morning, he was on the phone calling Victor saying, we need to take a look at this. We need your people down here. So in December of 2007, we were invited to the Sport Medicine Hospital in China, the Federal Sport Medicine Hospital. And we were offered the preliminary opportunity to test all of the doctors in the hospital, offer in China what is diagnostic reporting through the device, supportive diagnostic reporting, because the device is recognized in China for diagnosis and treatment. Okay. Biofeedback equipment, by the nature of the licensing there, is recognized that way. Hence, it's been a very stringent process getting our licensing through. But we went out there in December of 2007 in order to expose the technology to the doctors, enable them to confer and decide whether or not this was something that they wanted to take part in, and enable us to actually work with the athletes. So once again, we tested every single one of the doctors, had to issue reports, which were then scrutinized by the board. And at the end of this trip, we were really, really lucky. Li Guoping had done a residency at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, New York. He was a very, very progressive mind for the typical Chinese mindset. And you have no idea. And he understood the concept of the quantum. He could grab that. And so he was very, very open-minded, and he supported us just in the biggest of big ways, and enabled us to have access to all the athletes. So in the beginning was the creation of how it was going to work. After they had seen it, they had chosen to implement a program working with us. Therein, the foundation was set, or we were working to set at that point, the foundation for what it was going to be, what the Olympics were going to be with skio. And initially, before we could even start working in any training capacity with the athletes, working in any therapeutic training capacity, we initially had to be scrutinized through the reporting function and see what the response was to the device working at the national sport level. So the program, before they would even let us touch an athlete in therapy, the program began with us testing over 358 national athletes in China. We did that in 6 weeks. There were 2 of us. There were 2 of us. You'll notice a little bit of gray in this beard of mine right here. And in fact, the Olympics was such an insane experience because we were literally pulling 18, 20-hour days for 4.5 months straight without a day off, Jeff and myself. Like, it was just above and beyond. So 358 national athletes tested. The way that happened was as the athletes were coming into Beijing, being moved from their respective provinces, they were brought through the federal hospital in order to start their initial drug testing and their initial physicals to be approved for competition. So as they were coming in and getting their blood work done, so were they getting their bioenergetic scanning. I thought that in and of itself was just a huge step forward for us. It was amazing to be a part of their initial screening process. That was just absolutely brilliant, brilliant. So 358 athletes were tested before we ever had the opportunity to touch an athlete therapeutically. And initially in testing, we were not even allowed to talk to the athlete. There was no intimate information allowed at all. We were blindly assessing from data. An athlete would come in, they would get tested, we would copy the data folder, they would leave. So on average, Jeff and I were having to put together 10 to 15 diagnostic reports per day. And considering it took us about 45 minutes in process to get one done, and the process was bloody arduous, it was quite a feat. Quite a feat. Here's the alopecia. Oh yeah, look, no beard, that's why. Okay, so after we had ultimately passed go with testing, and we weren't even allowed to offer our findings directly to the athlete. It was initially done where we would assess the athlete, offer our reports to our board, that group of doctors that you saw sitting at the table, offer our reports to the board. They had to pass the board and be compared to physical tests, the physical tests which were done in the hospital, and then released by the doctors to the coaches. We were never allowed to even talk to the athletes. And upon our success with 358 tested, we were really invited to the show. And this is really where the journey began with the Olympics. With speed walking. Isn't that exciting? A big round of applause for speed walking. Who knew that was an Olympic sport? Really? You know, speed walking? Well, I mean, by the condition that you can see this athlete, it was surprising to me. However, it very much in the beginning, because they were playing it very, very safe with us. They were initially just giving us athletes, which they both expected to medal, but that they weren't so concerned about. And so we were given speed walking, which to me felt like turtle racing. Right? But I suppose, I mean, we were given national level athletes about to compete in the Olympics, hence we should have been very grateful, and I guess I was. So we started with speed walking. And we tested the entire speed walking team. And before they would let us do therapy, even though we had been cleared at the national level, the team coaches and the team doctors, sports is riddled in politics. The team doctors and the team coaches first were going to scrutinize us and ensure that what we had was of value. So after we tested the initial, the athletes, we were then up against their team of doctors, once again, having to prove ourselves. Everything in China was proving ourselves. It was all such that there were stages. So initially was the testing stage, and if we passed this testing stage, they would move us into therapy with athletes. And if we passed the therapy, by passed, I mean we had the approval and the acceptance of the team, and we boasted good results, they would then enable us to work with higher profile athletes, etc., and moving on into different realms. So we started with speed walking, and they were being very, very cautious with everything it was that we were doing. And then getting the athletes initially to agree to therapy was also difficult because they couldn't understand the concept. And that close to competition, athletes are very, very insecure. So this was the first athlete we were able to get onto the device and work in therapy with. And he was just the sweetest, kindest guy. You can see by the light on the face. He was just an absolute darling. And he enabled us to really connect to the athletes, because with this particular athlete, and for the purpose of this tape, such that it is understood, every athlete in which we discuss anything personal as to the work that we did and what symptoms they had, what symptoms they had improved, have all been released and authorized. I have been authorized to discuss this about the athlete now. It's my honor to present this because Professor Nelson has never seen these pictures either, and in some ways he paid for them. So this is my gift to you. Where our story really started, and the Chinese names are so hard to remember, so I needed to flip back there for a second. Where our story really starts in therapy was working with Liu Hung. Liu Hung was a gold medal athlete from Athens. She won gold in speed walking in Athens, so they had expectations of her performance in Beijing. However, for 3 months prior to our arrival, she had been experiencing cardiac insufficiency. Yeah, and there was symptoms of chest pains, chronic fatigue, and she had lost serious ground in reference to her performance. Working with the device in 5 sessions, all of her symptoms went away. Subsequently, from the work that we did, her performance was back up to its peak potential. And it was amazing to see the shift in this athlete, because this started in what I would have considered a more physical blockage, not physical in a structural, but a more energetic blockage. But it was very, very exciting to be able to see the device work with the athletes and ultimately be able to boast the results in which we saw. What I discovered in working with sports and working with athletes is that their bodies were so fine-tuned that working with the device very much felt like flipping a switch, more so than the training that it would seem with your average client, because their bodies were so responsive. It was just an incredible, incredible experience. So working with Yu Hung, we were able to support her release of symptoms, and she was our first gold medal athlete. And that was very exciting, because once we had really boasted success in therapy, this is when they started opening it all up to us and giving us everyone. And this was our first success story. So from speed walking, they were still playing it somewhat safe, and they gave us men's trampoline. And once again, initially I thought men's trampoline, oh my God, this is a little better than turtle racing, but still not quite the Olympic features that we're hoping for here, right? And so with men's trampoline, this was a really exciting story though, and it was so wonderful for me to put together this presentation, because I hadn't even looked at these pictures in about 3.5 years. And once I got into the memories of this story and then on from this point, wow, what an experience. So we started with men's trampoline, and men's trampoline was the story of Dong Dong versus Lu Chen Long. Dong Dong versus Lu Chen Long. You see, the Chinese knew that they were the best in the world at the trampoline event. So the competition was internal. Even though it was a World Olympic national event, they walked in very, very much knowing that they were the best in the world. And once again, they were being cautious with us, giving us athletes that they knew would perform. So Dong Dong versus Lu Chen Long. Dong Dong won gold in Athens and had won every major event in trampoline for the 4 years in between. Lu Chen Long was a younger athlete whom was also a very insecure athlete, and was overshadowed by Dong Dong for years. And yes, his name really was Dong Dong. So like everything, our work commenced in testing. Now working with Dong Dong, because he was the gold medal trampoline athlete, won every major world event, working with Dong Dong, he was not as interested in therapy as the second string athlete, Lu Chen Long. And so with Lu Chen Long, you can see, right from the moment he came in, he was on a mission, but his confidence was not there. And our work with him was emotional, and it really showed me the potential of the device, especially with athletes, and Chinese athletes to boot, as the Chinese by nature are a very emotionally conservative culture. Ooh, conservative culture. What an eloquent way of saying that. An emotionally conservative culture. One might say repressed. And so working with Lu Chen Long, we were really able to release, in working with him, and being able to detect a lot of the emotional stressors through both the sport panel with the conflict issues, which we were able to see through that panel, as well as how he was reacting to flower essences and Bach flowers. We were really able to understand the nature of his emotional stress, which really had all to do with confidence and fear. What I found with these types of athletes, when they were jumping 100 feet in the air, there was fear. Surprise. Surprise. But in working with him, we did 10 sessions. And in those 10 sessions, by the point that we hit the 8th session, Dong Dong was very curious. Dong Dong was very interested. You see, because what he had started witnessing was in their practices, Liu Chenlong was outperforming him. Okay, so we were really able to, through our technology, as all of us know, interface, understand the athlete emotionally, and really be able to profile and enable him a dialogue and the ability to release. And what happened was amazing. In working with Liu Chenlong, we saw Dong Dong. He came out as Dong Dong always apparently did, and he performed beautifully, as did Liu Chenlong. But you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner of the photograph to the right-hand side, where he is upside down, there is the Life magazine picture. He was featured in Life magazine for his performance in the Olympics. And not only was this his first medal in a national event, he won gold and was further featured by Life magazine. And this was a second string athlete that they did not expect results from. Now what was exciting was when we moved into women's trampoline. So from men's trampoline into women's trampoline, getting more exciting. Isn't that bird's nest just awesome? Wow, eh? I mean, what an amazing thing the Olympics did for the Chinese city of Beijing. It was just unbelievable, the infrastructure that was built to support it. They just went all out. It was crazy. So women's trampoline. And women's trampoline, once again, like men's trampoline, wasn't so much a national event as it was a Chinese event, again, because the Chinese were just absolutely dominating the sport. So this one became the tale of Huang Shanshan versus He Wen'an. Huang Shanshan, like Dong Dong, had won every major event since 2004. He Wen'an was a second string athlete who was injured. She had a knee injury. And her performance, due to hormonal stress, her performance had been not up to par coming into the games, yet she was still number 2 in the country. However, she had never once placed first in any major competition. So, working with Huang Shanshan and He Wen'an, we were, once again, everything began with testing. We were able to do therapy again with He Wen'an. With Huang Shanshan, like Dong Dong, she was the gold medal athlete. She wasn't interested in working with us. As far as she was concerned, everything was perfect. With He Wen'an, there was an athlete who had been overshadowed, so confidence was an issue. Also, there was a knee injury, and there was hormonal stress. In the past, as I said, Huang Shanshan had won every event. The best He Wen'an had ever placed was a bronze. And once again, Huang Shanshan came out, her performance was exceptional. However, He Wen'an, the athlete in which we worked with 10 times in therapy, whom we worked very substantially on the pain in her knee and releasing the symptom in her knee. Also, she had not menstruated for 6 months from overtraining. This is where, in therapy, it was very important that we had the athletes coming off with the experience of having had the therapy, with confidence in the device if we were to be able to see them again. Because at that point, it was all left to the athlete as to whether or not they wanted to give us the opportunity to work with them. All the work was done over their resting period. So if they were going to come and give us their very limited rest time, that we had best boast results. So with He Wen'an, we worked with the knee, and there was a release of symptoms in the knee. Hence, you can see that the bandage she's wearing is not very supportive. When we started, she had one of those full supportive braces with the metal and the hinges at the side when we started with her. That's how she was competing. By the end, she had a little tensor bandage that she was working with. And what I learned was, initially in the first 2 or 3 sessions, I was not getting the hormonal results. And the coaches were in fear that she would start menstruating during the sport, during competition, and that her performance would subsequently decrease and her potential would decrease. After 3 sessions, I was not able to boast any results, and that led me to thinking about using the device differently, which has moved my personal work from this particular case in a completely different way. I had always heard, having never really worked with Bill, I had always heard that Bill's work with the device was always approached in a very minimalistic manner. And what I thought was, what would happen if I attempted to just really focus using one therapy panel on a specific area of issue? And so with this athlete, in order to work with the hormonal stress that I saw, I recognized that it was the byproduct of overtraining, the emotional stress, and everything. And I recognized that that stress very much rested within the realm of the chakra. And so using the scalar panel, I set to a 30-minute lower chakra release. Now, I would venture to say that everybody in this room, or very few in this room, have ever actually used the little timer box next to the lower chakra release in the scalar panel. Having set that 30-minute session, the following day, she started to menstruate. And we saw this as, we saw this exact process with the athletes applying this exact therapy play out in a very repetitious fashion. We saw absolutely consistency in applying this therapy when we were working with that issue. And so we were able to support her in her release of pain. We were able to support her in her release of hormonal stress and enabling her body to restore its homeostasis. And we were able to interface the emotions by understanding them through the device. We were able to support her in the release of those things. And subsequently, she won gold. So it was the story of Dong Dong, Huang Chen Chen, He Wen-a, and Liu Chenlong, which really got the attention of the coaches within sports. And at this point, we were sought after. And this is where it became exciting. We moved from women's trampoline into men's diving. Now, men's diving, here you were you were getting the opportunity to work with the spotlight of the Olympics. Men's diving was absolutely one of the feature events of the 2008 Beijing Olympics. And this is where my work, where I became really excited by the work. I mean, the whole thing was an amazing ride, right? But it was, suddenly men's diving. Yeah. Okay, so we started working with the men's diving team, and we ultimately worked with all of the athletes for the diving team. And we started with Kai Chin and with Wang Feng, and we were able to work with them in therapy. There were no major symptoms that were prevalent with the men's diving team, short of the release of the emotional stress leading into the games. And of course, you saw the stress of anticipation, you saw the stress of performance, and you saw the stress of poor performance in times past. And it was a beautiful experience to be able to understand the athlete in that way when they could not communicate. And I speak Chinese. But when they could not communicate what the nature of their emotional stress was, they were never given that dialogue or that language. And sports in China is very much like the old feel of the USSR back in the day. Do what you're told. Make no waves. Say nothing. Right? So working with the diving team was really exciting. And after we worked with our athletes, I mean, we were able to support them in the release of emotional stress. Did we see their performance and their consistency improve? Absolutely we did. And working with these two, isn't that great? Yeah. I mean, but it shows you the rate at which they're spinning when you see his cheeks in that state. Isn't it unbelievable? And of course, once again, gold.
Question?
Yes.
specific athletes, and you're seeing the emotional issues come up, and you're saying they're a repressed society. At that point, are you having conversations with them around?
That's where it really. Thank you for asking the question. The question was, so at this point in our experience in China, were we able to begin the dialogue process with athletes, especially when doing the emotional work? From the work and the accomplishments of the trampoline team, we were now able to dialogue the athlete. And that was just a huge step forward for us because, once again, they were all in fear that we would dialogue with the athlete and we would bring them into an insecure, fear-based state prior to competition. And that close to a world competition, the athletes were all very, very insecure. It was absolutely smart on their behalf to not allow us to dialogue until they saw what it was that we were going to be doing with the athletes. So yes, we were able at this point to dialogue. And that was yet again another stage that we had passed in order to get there. And after we worked with the two big boys, we had the two little guys, Huoliang and Lin Yu, both of which gold medal athletes, or the two in the beginning were gold medal athletes in Athens. These two had never placed in the world circuit. And what was really, really interesting, what was his name again? Lin Yu. Lin Yu's father was a quantum physicist. His mother was a doctor. So when he came into the hospital, all these pictures were taken in the sport medicine hospital in Beijing. When he came into the hospital, he was really interested in learning more about the device. And it's very, very possible he was looking to purchase one. I don't know if that happened, but he was very keen and very excited. And this was really great because finally, not only were we dialoguing with the athletes, but we were becoming friends with the athletes. And this was a really cool progression. So both of these guys, after support with the device, both working with nutritional balancing as well as emotional support, both of these athletes came out and performed and gold medals. Women's diving. So after success with men's diving, we were given the women. And the women, you'll discover as we go through this presentation today looking at sports, the women in China perform much better than the men on the world circuit. And when we were given women's diving, this was a huge honor because the first athlete you're going to see in this slide, Guo Jingjing, she's known as the queen of diving. Guo Jingjing had won every event in diving over the past 10 years leading up to the Beijing Olympics. Every event. And what was interesting was with Guo Jingjing, we were really able to do some very deep work therapeutically, and this there again a lot, the majority of that work being within the emotional realm of release. Guo Jingjing did not want to compete for these Olympics. She had won every major event coming into the games. She had recently been married to a very affluent man in Hong Kong. And she did not want to compete. She was forced by China to compete in these games because the games were at home and this was national pride, national face. And what we discovered was, as we worked with the national sport program, we discovered these types of problems whereby the state could impose on an athlete, the athlete was in essence owned by the state could impose on them mandatory competition. And working with Guo Jingjing, she was like razor sharp, like ice. When she competed, it wasn't a question of nerves or effort. She had this down, but she did not want to compete. And so working with her, you can see Victor made a point of posing with her because she by far would have been probably the second most famous athlete in China. There were posters and pictures of her in every mall, on every bus, on every subway. She was everywhere. So working with her was a beautiful experience, an honor for me. You saw Victor was making sure he was in the pictures with her. She came out and she did what she always does. She performed, and she won gold. Wu Ming was her synchronized partner. And of course, with the younger athletes, they're always overshadowed. right, by the older athletes. So Wu Ming came out, and she was dealing with a lot of fear in reference to actually just what it was that they do, which is twisting, twirling, and jumping around in midair and landing into a very hard surface when traveling at those kinds of velocities. And so working with a lot of fear was the work that we were able to do with Wu Ming. And she had her best showing ever, and she won bronze. However, leave it to Guo Jingjing, who was just such an amazing woman, and once again, such a beautiful honor to get to work with this athlete. In their synchronized work, they really came out in style, and not only did Guo Jingjing boast a personal gold in these Olympics, she also boasted a synchronized gold. And so absolutely a lot of the work that we did with the device surrounding emotional release was imperative to their success. We saw this consistently. And then we had, like with men's diving, a very similar story. With the women's team, they had the understudies, Chen Ru, and Chen Ru was the next generation, an unbelievable competitor. We got to do 10 therapeutic sessions working with every member of the diving team. And it's amazing, but you'll keep noticing the people that we work with, it seemed almost very synonymous. Skio plus athlete equal gold, right? So Chen Ru gold. Wang Xin, this was the other, also a synchronized pair. Wang Xin came out and bronze. Working with the two of them, synchronized gold. Different levels. I guess the first pair of women were jumping from a higher, diving from the higher meters, and these two were lower. But look at that, eh? Just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, so from diving, we were then brought into weightlifting. And weightlifting was very, very cool because, once again, in China, their expectations were for the women to perform a lot more than for the men to perform. So we were actually working with the women's weightlifting champion. Yes. Chen Yan. And she was wonderful. Chen Yan presented with insomnia from overtraining and a lot of emotional stress coming into the games. In China, what was interesting was we discovered that regardless of an athlete's performance, their ability to compete was not dictated by their performance. Their ability to compete was dictated by politics in a country like China. So Chen Yan had a lot of stress coming into the games because she didn't know whether or not she would even be able to compete in the games, even though she had just won the Worlds and was number one. Working with Chen Yan, you eat what? We were really able to understand a lot of what was happening with her. So, through the test matrix, in our first test, in the bank, you can see the big smile on my face because I was in utter disbelief. You eat what? Insulin shock, sugar regulation, pancreas was showing up all over the matrix. So I had to ask her, and I mean, weightlifters, they eat a lot of food. They put in a lot of fuel in order to be able to build their bodies that way. She was eating 8 kilograms of watermelon every day. And when I asked the coach and the team doctor why they would allow her to eat 8 kilograms of watermelon each day, they said because she likes it. So her chronic fatigue, the byproduct of her insomnia, we found rooted in blood sugar instability. And so just from even being able to confer with her and offer dietary changes, both to her and her coach, it really changed her experience. The chronic fatigue, just once she stopped putting in all those sugars, the chronic fatigue subsided. We were able to do 5 sessions with her working in therapy. I would like to have done more because work that I'll discuss a little later in the presentation would have absolutely been very, very interesting to have tried working with Chen Yan. But once again, she changed her diet. She came out and she performed as expected, and she won gold. Women's judo. Women's judo was very interesting because this was by far the sweetest, nicest athlete we ever worked with. Her name was Tong Wen, and she was just nice. Very welcoming of the device. She had a soft tissue injury in her ankle that we worked with. We were able to do 10 sessions working with her, and by the end of 10 sessions, we had a complete release of symptoms. And she came out and she dominated. That girl in the slide, I hazed it out to give it the memory effect. Memories, right? But that girl is in midair, the one that she is manhandling and throwing around there.
Oh, yeah.
In midair, Tong Wen came out and just dominated. And victory. And look at that face, eh? Just wonderful. We were then able to work with the women's swim team, and this is where the work really took on a different face. Working with endurance-based athletes, such as swimming. Once again, swimming is obviously a feature event in the Summer Olympics. And working with these athletes, they were trained so hard and pushed so hard that when we started working with them, we had, the experiences that we had were contraindications. Not contraindications in that there was any problem or we caused any healing crisis or anything of that sort. That's not the contraindication. What we found was when we worked these athletes in stress reduction that close, and of course, when we started with the women's swim team, we were about 6 weeks away from the games. And as an athlete is being trained for major world competition at the national level, their coaches are training to peak them. They're increasing the workload of training in every day in order to bring the athlete up to that peak point where they're supposed to peak at competition. So, working with swimming, every time we would work to support them in stress reduction and release, what was happening was exactly what we would expect, was the athlete was coming off the device in their daisy haze, you know, coming off like Jello, ready to sleep for a week. Think about it when you're being pushed, when you're running really, really hard, right? You're working hours and hours and hours, and you've been doing so for a long period of time. When you're going all out, and then you take that first 5-minute cat nap, you tend to be screwed. Right? That's where you hit the wall and you feel how tired you and the body are. And that's what was happening when we did the first 3 sessions with women's swimming. The athletes were coming off in great moods, they were very relaxed, they were very happy, they wanted to sleep, and the coaches were looking at us as though this is not what we're looking for in our partnership with you as the athletes. And that there again led me into a Nelsonian thinking, whereby I considered, okay, what would happen if we used the device in a more focused way? And because we were desperate to get results with these athletes, you know, this team was very, very important, and everything we did was being watched. Because we were desperate to get results, we had to try something new. At first, we had to get past the coach. And the coach enabled us to test every woman on the women's swim team. And we worked with Liu Zijie in therapy. We also worked with Zhao Liu Yang. Try this. Because we were at a loss with the initial 3 therapeutic sessions that we had tried, because we were at a loss for how to boast the results that the coaches were looking for, I in fact remember getting on the phone and calling Bill and asking Bill what his thoughts were about the idea of testosterone stimulation through the device. And from that conversation in the 4th session, we set forth a 10-session protocol, a 10-session model, looking at the stimulation of testosterone, growth hormone, and all the IG markers. Now, what we saw in pulsing testosterone stimulation, what we saw what was beautiful was that there was a beautiful baseline. All of the athletes were being dope tested coming into the Olympics. Plus, they had seen their testosterone levels for 6 months coming up to the games. So they've been able to monitor where testosterone and growth hormone were at in the athletes. And of course, that close to games, what we saw consistently were that their levels were low due to the overtraining. And so we started by pulsing a 10-minute stimulation. We ran 10-minute stimulations for 3 sessions. We were able to work with these girls for about 20 sessions, over 20 days. 20 sessions over 20 days. Every day pulsing testosterone, growth hormone, and the IGs, cortisol decrease. And every day increasing the therapy duration to the end whereby we were pulsing testosterone, growth hormone, stim for up to about 30 minutes. Now what we saw was every one of the girls that we ran this program with was breaking their competition bests in practice. A national athlete of this caliber has two scores. They have their practice score and their competition. Their competition score is always faster than their practice score because the adrenaline of competition, right? They were all breaking their competition bests in practice. We were also hearing through the doctors that they were able to measure quantitative increases in blood. And then, of course, the fear of doping, of setting off doping markers, was the next area and issue of stress. It was explained to me by the head of sport medicine in China that when there's been a steroid stimulant, it changes the shape of the red blood cell from being round or oval to square. And that is how they're able to detect doping. But of course, what we were stimulating, we weren't teleporting testosterone and growth hormone into their bodies. We were stimulating their bodies to produce. And hence, what increased was natural production. Subsequently, there were no doping markers set off. Now, in the beginning, when we worked with these athletes, as most Chinese athletes, they were very comprised, very refined, very emotionally conservative. By the end of the month, by the end of a 20-day cycle whereby we were doing this, what we saw in the athletes was what you would expect. Their attitudes changed, they became far more aggressive, they were complaining of menstrual cramping when having menstruation, but they were also fast. In fact, they were so fast that they won gold. Zhao Liu Yang won gold in women's butterfly. Liu Zijie won gold. And the team, the women's team, every one of those girls we worked with running the testosterone stimulation, they also won gold. Now, it was really, really nice. Has anybody in the room ever been to China? Raise your hand. So the food kind of sucks, eh? Oh yeah, it was horrible. The food was just horrible. So I got a call years before. My partner, Roger Lessard, and if you don't know who Roger is, Roger by far has been one of the most important and colorful people in our business and industry. Roger is probably responsible for being the most successful marketer of the skio technology in the world, and we love him for it. Anyways, Roger and I, years before, had gone to Dubai and worked with the crown families of Dubai, Bahrain, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. We were hooking up camels at 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the desert. We were doing crazy stuff. And subsequently, since the Sheikh had bought 6 devices to manage different programs within his kingdom. A kingdom. Hanging out with a guy who has a kingdom, right? Very crazy. One of the coolest things that ever happened with the work with Sheikh Saeed was 6 devices running different aspects of what's happening in his experience. There was easily about $300 million in horse stock that he had, race horses, Arabians, and so on, and easily about $250,000 worth, or $1 million, worth of racing camels. Racing camels. And the racing camels were by far more important to the sheikhs than the horses. The racing camel is very interesting. When I got to Dubai, I would never have believed this, but the racing camels are actually raced by robot jockeys. And it was explained to me that Dubai, or the UAE, got into big trouble internationally because they were bringing in jockeys from Pakistan and Sudan, and when they were young and light, they were useful. When they got old and their weight increased, they were no longer of use, and there were issues of their ethical treatment. So as a result of this, they were no longer able to bring in the jockeys for the camel racing, and they had to go to robots, which was very interesting. But working with the sheikh, one of the things which we did, which was very, very exciting with his programs, was that working with his horses, he had a program where they were ultimately fertilizing, or putting a fertilized egg into a surrogate, and so they were taking a purebred Arabian fertilized egg and inserting it into a Clydesdale surrogate. The reason was, at the last 2 weeks of gestation for an Arabian horse, because the horse is so small, they were unable to eat in the last 2 weeks, and hence the mother and the foal would lose, they would estimate, about 30 pounds of potential. Putting them into the Clydesdale, the idea was the Clydesdale would be able to filter in more nutrition into the horse, and I know, it's amazing, eh? Their success rate was 3%. Before they found the device. After they found the device and started implementing it in conjunction with their program, their success rate went up to 65% on this program. Subsequently, the sheikh bought over 6 devices that they work with in different facets of his kingdom. Anyways, we were really, really lucky to see Sheikh Saeed in Beijing. He's also a world-renowned athlete. He's a professional skeet shooter. And he was actually in Beijing to compete. The beautiful thing was, I got to totally hang out with him again, which was awesome, and the food was the best food I had the entire time I was there. Now, every athlete that came into Beijing had to stay in the Olympic Village, except Sheikh Saeed. Sheikh Saeed had this beautiful villa about 10 minutes away from the Olympic Village that was built for him to show up for that 1 week. Oh yeah, it's absurd being around these guys. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. When we traveled once in his jet, it was lined with gold, because gold reflects radiation. Very progressive. Anyways, we were able to both do some work with him during the games. I know, it's unfathomable. $8 billion net worth public. Crazy. So we got to hang out with him. We got to eat good food for the first time in our experience in China over that 4 months. And we got to work with his entire entourage. Rabi is his right hand. And that was, you gotta love the professional athletes brought forth by the United Arab Emirates. That was the team. Yeah, and Sheikh Saeed came out and he had a good showing at the Olympics. Before this, he had just placed gold in the Asian Games. And we didn't get to do a lot of work, but we definitely did a lot of eating. It was fantastic. So we got to see Sheikh Saeed out there, which was great. And then this was the highlight of working with the Olympics. We were given the women's tennis team, and this is the team in which I was most excited to work with, because these, yes.
I just want to ask a question about the testosterone that you were doing every day for 20 days.
Every day for 20 days.
Because I thought that really it's just wait about 3 days between treatments.
3 days between. You know, a lot of those are contraindications that I would, generally pass over to Bill. However, what I would say is this. Some of those, certainly things I'm teaching now in my lectures in North America, are that a lot of those old ideas of only test every 3 days, or only hook somebody up every 3 days at max, are in fact wrong. Those were ideas which were brought forth before Professor Nelson and his brilliance. Ego stroke, ego stroke, ego stroke. Before Professor Nelson and his brilliance brought us the Skio. And in the Skio, we moved into a very huge advancements in autofocus emphasis. And the device was now able to deliver to the athlete, or to the client, what was their needs, and be able to increase or decrease power based on the person's needs. And the biggest thing I've learned in working in China, because we were able to work in a different way than typically has ever been done before. One of the things I learned was what we're doing is there's so many things that we're doing, and it's so layered and structured, but really what we're doing, at least legally, is biofeedback. Biofeedback is training. So think about it this way. You get a brand new puppy. You train the puppy every day. You do your obedience training with the puppy. You tell the puppy to come, sit, heel, lay down. And if you work with him every day, puppy trains up quickly and works well. Right? If you work with that dog sporadically, you end up with a dog that's not working nearly as well or able to realize his peak potentials in that training. What we're doing is training. The more we work with an athlete consistently and focused, or the more we work with a client consistently and focused, the better our results, always. And this was something we absolutely learned in China, because we had the ability to work with people 20, 30, 40 days in a row on the device, trying to boast results quickly.
Did you worry about anything about stopping?
I worried about everything.
Stopping the testosterone that you have.
Well, we worked with these girls up to and through the games. Through the games. And so working with the testosterone growth hormone, everything was on a gradual increase as we attempted to match it to the intensity of their training. And so that we were working to max out the stimulation of the testosterone growth hormone. We were looking to max out that potential. I mean, we were creating, so there had never been anything that had ever been approached in this type of a way that I was aware of anyways. So we were creating in the moment. And the idea was, as they're working to peak the athlete, we should be working to peak the stimulation of testosterone growth hormone. So that's very much something we took into consideration.
Did they get weaned off of it as well?
Oh, well, no. And so the testosterone growth hormone thing was probably the most important work we did, because initially we did this at the national level, working with the national athletes. And so at the provincial level, because we had to, once again, our backs were up against the wall and we had to boast results, we got back into the testosterone growth hormone stimulation because we knew we could find a quantitative measure, something that could be measured to support. So we started working with the rowing team and we implemented a 30-day program. This had nothing to do with competition, but a 30-day program working with the training of those athletes and measuring their testosterone growth hormone levels. We ran the exact same protocol, a gradual increase over a 30-day period with sessions every day. Every one of the athletes at the provincial level maxed their potentials in what the previous baseline testing had showed, maxed their potentials in the production of testosterone growth hormone and red blood cell activity. So the problem once again was now we were doing it at the provincial level and the province owned the research. So once again, although we saw on paper the increases, they would not release that data to us. Our next step in sports in China, when we commence in China again, our next step is to go into the National Sport Hospital to pay for our own study, funny enough with the women's swim team because they love us, looking at testosterone growth hormone stimulation and owning the data. Because if we own this data, then I hate to coin the term digital doping, but literally in this case what we have is digital undetectable doping. And if we boast that data, that's 10,000 devices easily to every team within the province that is endurance or strength based, which is about 90% of them. That'll be 10,000 devices in 1 year easily. Every team has a team doctor. Every team has a team chiropractor. Every team will have a ski up. So yes, I'm not done yet.